We're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Appreciate you joining today. Today's date is Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in issue 367 in the NPM RFC's repo. And if you haven't already, feel free to add yourself to the attendee list in the HackMD doc that I just copied and pasted in chat. And we'll get started since we have a pretty decent sized agenda today. Quick reminder, these calls and all comms on the RFC's repo and on all NPM repos and projects are governed under a code of conduct that we expect and hope folks will abide by, and appreciate you being kind and mindful as other people are speaking. If you'd like to add or comment on something, feel free to please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yeah, I just want to make sure that everybody's got a chance to read that. And yeah, is there any announcements from folks on the call? Anything that's come up in the last week that they'd like to share? If not, no announcements, we can dive right in. I put in the first section here a few RFCs that we've been keeping open for a while, specifically the overrides, Registry Protocol, and the Workspaces v2 work, which our team has dove into pretty headfirst. So just want to essentially identify those as good first topics to essentially decide whether or not we're ratifying them and moving them into accepted, since I feel like there's no more discussion essentially happening in there. Wes, you have a quick comment?
Yeah, it looks like there's some unanswered comments in the overrides one. I'm not sure if they need this to be answered, but for it to be accepted. But I just wanted to make sure we pointed out that the last comment from Isaac seems to address some of Zoltan's concerns, maybe, but then there's a few others after it, just sort of asking things. So if we're going to close it and merge it, we might want to also follow up with answers there.
Yeah, the last few ones I see, I guess, yeah, Dom commented here, as well as Archer, just asking about progress, essentially. Okay. Isaac, I know that this is your RFC. Did you want to respond to maybe, I guess, the one question? Is there another one that you saw specifically, Wes? I see Dominicus's question at the end there from.
I think actually now that it's been a while and I'm rereading, I thought that some of Zoltan's stuff wasn't answered, but it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, there were some suggestions that Zoltan had made that would have either, they're not bad ideas, but I think we talked about them a little bit and kind of decided that they were either unnecessary and kind of just unnecessary bike shedding, or would make the implementation a little harder or make the usage of it a little more confusing. So we kind of punted on a lot of that. But yeah, it looks like, I mean, basically where this still is every time we talk about it, we're like, yep, that's pretty much what we want to do. Just haven't gotten around to digging into the implementation. I think workspaces have taken a higher priority since then. So it's just time and typing holding it back. So, I mean, I would say, yeah, let's go ahead and ratify it. We can always, when we get closer to implementation, we can always change it if need be, if we find that there's challenges, but we may as well mark it as its current actual status.
Yeah, and just so other folks know that we are hoping to obviously execute on this pretty shortly.
Relatively soon.
Once, yeah. So, okay, great. Moving on then to The second item there, that was the registry protocol. Is this, I feel like this is in a similar state.
This one
RFC.
actually had a
Or more.
somewhat subtle and kind of interesting and weird impact. So if you and it's, I think the reason why we haven't moved forward on it is because this is not been fully resolved. So the issue is, if I list a dependency with a registry specifier, and then that package has a dependency which is just a normal, foo at 1.x. Should we resolve that thing's dependencies against
The registry,
that we're pulling that thing out of? My intuition is yes, we should. Like, a registry specifier should basically be contagious throughout the rest of the, that is now the new default registry for all things down that branch of the dependency graph. The problem arises when you have a registry which is not proxying and only contains the things that you want to override. You end up in this state where you're going to get 404s. And then last time we talked about it, we kind of talked about, well, maybe do we want to try that registry for its depths and then fall back to the default registry? But then you're just essentially opening the door to name hijacking attacks, right? Like, and that's what we want to avoid. So it's better, in my opinion, like the case that I would make, and I guess I need to write this down in text on the issue, but the case that I would make is, if you've published foo and bar into your private registry, you're kind of expecting that people who are in, today with npm 6, 7, yarn 1 and 2, whatever, you're expecting that people are only installing that thing by doing npm install foo -- registry equals my private registry, right? Otherwise, they can't get it. That's the only way to get it. And in that case, all of its steps are going to be resolved from that private registry. If I then later with npm 7 do npm install, foo at registry : my private registry #foo at 1.x, if it doesn't fetch its dependencies from that same registry, then we're going to be open to name jacking.
Yeah.
So
I see some comments from Jordan and Wes, and I also saw Rebecca, you raised your hand or clapped there for a second. Did you want to top up?
No, that was really, Isaac got to where I was going with that, which was just that any existing private registry has to be, that's not used with scopes, has to be proxying already, or at least that package has to be fully installable from that registry for it to work. So it doesn't break anyone to go that route. And I think that is install everything from the registry that package came from makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that the argument against it, which I don't think is very compelling, not to undersell it before I present it, but the argument against it is I might want to, let's say, fork Express, but not fork, connect and everything else, or everything that Express depends on. So in that case, but in that case, it's like, okay, well, in my fork of Express, I just need to have, registry : default npm registry as all of its dependencies to kind of get out of that world. So,
or your registry proxies, like every sensible registry already does.
Right, exactly. So I think it's entirely a hypothetical that doesn't exist in practice. And if we just make the feature work that way, then we're not taking anything away that currently exists.
Yeah,
we're taking something away that is probably a bad idea to make exist.
Yeah, no one will make their thing that way because it will never work.
Right. So yeah, so the action item here is for me to write that down in the RFC itself, and then I think it's ready for ratifying.
Well, and the other thing is, once overrides exist with the registry specifier, if somebody created a package with this ill-advised feature in mind, that could always be fixed by at the top level using overrides to say, actually, this forked expresses, each of these dependencies should come from this other registry, right?
Yeah, so
not super ergonomic, but it's like, it means it's possible.
It would be it would be possible, but it's not significantly easier than just putting that in the package JSON of your forked express, because
Sure.
because you have to specify every one of those. Like there's no way with the overrides syntax as we have it presented so far, there's no way to say everything down this branch of the dependency graph needs to use this other registry.
Right.
Parent package JSONs. So say I decide I want, which I think this is a great. These are where simple features come together to give you real power. Say I decide to finally like take what is Express 5 and publish it to an alternate registry and tell people, hey, like I know it's never going to happen in the main line, but like here I am supporting it. All I have to do is publish a package JSON that they can point to as a parent with all of those overrides predefined in my central location. And then I'm able to leverage these three features in conjunction to basically fork an entire ecosystem all at once.
Well, you don't need the whole parent package JSON for that. You just, the minimal part you need is the ability to like point to another file full of overrides somewhere.
Sure, but I'm just saying we don't have that in the spec today, but we do have an RFC for the parent package JSON, which solves these problems.
Yeah, that provides a way to do that. So yeah, I think that's fine then. I'll just I'll update the registry specifier to add that behavior. It does make the implementation a little more involved, because we're going to need to. It's not just simply an update to npm package arg, right? It's actually going to be, it's going to affect the whole build ideal tree process.
Yep.
Would it affect deduping as well, Isaac?
Yep.
Potentially.
Yeah, a bit. I don't think in any way that matters per se, right? Because we already, if we're getting something out of a registry, so it would only affect deduping if the registry is not providing but we're going to get integrity by the time we're.
Yeah, I would think that if the integrity matches.
Okay,
Yeah,
so if it provides the same content, even though it's from a different registry, it would still continue to get deduped.
Correct.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
The only way in which that wouldn't be the case might be if we don't get integrity somehow for that thing, but like we're fetching the tarball and we're getting it. So it's from a registry, like we're going to have integrity.
So I took down the action item there. Anything else that folks want to chime in?
No, so it's worth mentioning, I guess, the other part of the conversation where it was kind of going, Zoltan and Mael were sort of objecting to taking this small of a step without specifying what the next step would be. And I'm strongly opposed to specifying more steps than we're currently taking than the next one. But what they were looking for was basically a way to say, define a short name for a registry in your package JSON and be able to say, okay, so anything that is foo : should expand to registry : https : / foo.com / whatever, which feels like a pretty small ergonomic fix to our read package JSON behavior. Like that's something that's very like sugar and ergonomic. So we can just sort of specify that after getting this, but I still want this. And this is still useful as kind of that building block.
Is that feature request something that would apply to more than just the current package?
So there's a little bit of an open question there about whether it should be package specific in package JSON and in the manifest, or if it should be a config level setting. I would prefer it to be in package JSON actually, because then otherwise your package is not installable unless somebody has the same configs as you, which is a situation we generally try to avoid.
It's the same problem we have for scopes.
Yeah, essentially. Although with scopes, it's a somewhat more contained problem, but yeah, it's we don't want to get into a situation where you have things published on the public registry with a short name that, is that nobody knows what it is. At
You
least
don't
with the
want me to-
scope, it's just you get a 404.
I mean, wouldn't you be getting the equivalent of a 404 if it was with a scope,
Undefined short name.
yeah,
Yeah, I guess it's not that much worse than scopes.
Yeah.
And that hasn't been a huge problem that people run into a lot.
I mean, they want people to be able to install their modules.
Right. There's sort of a
Um,
natural disincentive to doing it wrong.
It also it creates a disincentive to using this feature on the registry because it has to be in your npm-rc, versus if it's in your package JSON, then it's perfect. Like, I think that to me is like the policy question, because you put it in the package JSON, then it becomes well, then this is an appropriate thing to use on the public registry, which might be what you want.
Right. Yeah, that is a good point. If we don't want people publishing packages that can only be installed with npm 7, then yeah, that is an argument in favor of making it a config level thing.
But they can already do that with engines.npm, right?
Yeah, but it's notoriously tricky to figure out that, right? Like, every time we've gone down that road of saying like, well, we'll force you to have an engines npm that limits it to that version, because that can take an arbitrary semver range that is pretty tricky to know if you are specifying it correctly or not.
So that sounds like a separate.
That's a separate
like,
RFC from the
yeah.
registry specifier. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering.
I would like
go
to
ahead.
better understand what the concern, because I felt like there were that Zoltan and Mail had concerns about what the just the registry specifier itself. Like, they were like, well, we might accept this more complicated version, but we never want to see the registry specifier. And I'd like to understand those concerns better.
The argument that I would too. I mean, the argument that I got from them was basically that URLs are tricky and people get them wrong.
Which
I mean, okay, well, that's
that's a weird argument.
It's also the building block of the internet, and like, people can copy and paste it. I mean, I said, like, I don't really understand the objection here, and
I mean, I think it's ugly. Might be what it comes down to.
yeah,
Because like
it is ugly, and like,
yeah.
the ugliness is sort of a feature. It's
Yeah.
explicit, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I want you to get this thing from that registry. There's not really any way to make that any more terse and still have it be clear at all.
Because like the final comment from Zoltan is basically, well, his concern is that once it's added, it has to be supported forever, which is true, but also intended. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
it's
the
more
comment
about communication than anything. I think at that point,
Yeah.
the comment about using tarball URLs, it does allow semver ranges, which you can't do with a tarball URL. And also, we're going to have this feature restriction where once we kind of encounter one of those things, all of its dependencies effectively become scoped to that registry. So that's another thing you don't get with tarball URLs.
I think that's actually massively useful.
Yeah. Right now, using more than one private registry at once is pretty challenging.
Yeah.
Even if you have, I mean, you essentially have to map them to scopes. Otherwise, there's no way to do it.
Or you have your private registry do it for you.
Right. You have your one private registry proxy to another or something.
Yeah.
There are examples out there in the wild with Sneak and some other like pay us money and you get access to our private registry, which has our private code in it, type of products. And using more than one of those at once is very hard.
So just to be mindful of time, so it sounds like we're gonna take this away at that line, and if that's in there, just essentially the implementation detail note that we're talking about adding, are we okay with like ratifying that as well? I mean, do we want to look at the language next week, or like leave it open for another week then, or can this just be updated and pushed through?
I think we can just update it and push it through.
Okay.
I'll add the cascade comment.
Okay, thank you. So the last one here that I has been open for a while, and we've already been doing a lot of work in this space, is the sort of workspaces v2 work, which we kicked off, and making npm commands workspace aware through npm the two configs that we've included here. This is another one where, you know, we're already starting to implement this, so it feels like it should be ratified already. Yeah, if there's any cleanup, I think Roy, you know, is there like anything you were hoping to change this before we would move it forward? I know there was some discussion by Zoltan and Jordan again about terminology.
I think the main, sorry, I don't want to, if Roy's going to comment on it. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say yes. It's just the terminology that maybe needs a cleaning up before we merge it.
The other thing I was going to mention was that we should make a comb through that RFC and make sure that everything that it says is actually what we landed on doing. Because I know there have been a couple of edge cases we ran into in the implementation where we were like, oh, hey, this doesn't make sense. We have to go do it the subtly different way. It might be worth kind of outlining in there also how workspace scoped reification works, because that's also something that I think we didn't fully understand how to do it until we started doing it.
Yeah, so it sounds like action item is then, is it okay to leave that with you, Roy, and maybe I'll add myself there, and we can maybe pair on, we have a pairing session this week. We can potentially
make sure
pair.
It's actually what we did.
Yeah, if there's, anything, there's gonna be
That's
some.
a good question though. How much in detail we get like into, and also like how many of the commands, right? Like, because there is a lot of them. So we actually provide examples. Like, I know we wrote some documents on the side to go over all those examples of how the commands would work. Should we bring this over here?
That feels like it might be excessive for maybe like link to it as a supplemental reference or something. But for the RFC in particular, the key I think is so that anybody who's working with node modules or with npm has a better idea of what how it is we do what we do. Yeah.
And Wes, I see your comment. Docs are better than RFC content, so just continue to improve those, which we're trying to do. So with each one of these commands as they ship, we're actually updating the docs, and those get updated with every release now. So we're pretty much in sync. So also, if you feel like you want to improve the docs, feel free to go in there and like add a PR yourself as well, which is great. Okay, so I've put an action item. We'll leave this open for now then, and it sounds like there's some cleanup work still to do, and Roy can work with you to get this in good state so we can hopefully review it next week and just push it forward, because it's been open for a really long time. Like, yeah, year and a half or something. So okay, I want to move on quickly to then the next RFC that we have open here. Rebecca's npm audit fix provides overrides, and this is RFC number 356. We talked about this a little bit last week, and this is dependent on, I think, the obviously overrides landing in npm. So did you want to speak to this a little bit? I'm not sure if you've got time over the last week, Rebecca, to work on some of the feedback. I think that we suggested use cases. Oh, are you speaking? I think you're muted.
Yes, which I did add, and then I realized that just now that I didn't update the link to the rendered version, and so I was clicking on it, going, "Why didn't it change?" Okay, so yes, so I added the hotfix scenario. also spent some more time looking at like the changes to the new audit endpoint. So essentially, like this is the scenario of critical security flaws found in the dependency of one of your dependencies. The author of a transitive dependency is unavailable to provide updates. Packages widely used within your organization. The ecosystem will eventually switch to another module, but in the meantime, you need some sort of remediation. So you instruct your private registry to provide audit results for the affected version of the module that indicate that a custom patched version is available. And then I give an example of what those results might look like. And then that instructs NPM audit fix to edit your override section to include that, that patch.
So for folks that, I know Isaac, this is probably the first time you're looking at this as well. We spoke a little bit about like this is introducing a new type. Is that right? And essentially we would be able to...
So the audit results changed a lot between when I had last worked on them and now. So
V2, yeah.
So V2, you know, specifically the bulk endpoint versus the old regular audit endpoint. So the audit endpoint would tell you, here are the vulnerable versions and here's what you should, and here's our advice as to what you should use. And the bulk endpoint just says, these are the vulnerable versions. It returns the advisories that apply to your tree, and that's it. Mm-hmm. So that changes it slightly, and that we're not going, you don't provide update advice, but we can say, these are the overrides available for the version that you're using, if there are any. So if you click through on my, the updated, the example in this scenario, I think it makes it clearer than what I'm saying.
Yeah. I usually just skip down to examples first. I understand why they're not the first thing in the doc, but I've gotten in the habit of scrolling all the way to the bottom first. Yeah. I mean, I think this is good. I think it's good. We could actually start we could start putting this in the batch endpoints now, and there's really no harm in it because it just ignores extra keys anyway. Obviously becomes more valuable once we support overrides at all.
Yes. Yeah, a private registry could start injecting this at any time and everything will just ignore it.
Right. And we'll still try to find whatever version we can. Then I guess the other question becomes, so this is good as kind of I like that this is so small as an RFC. Yeah. The subsequent question becomes what do we do with that? Do we automatically put the overrides in? Do we prompt and let you, is there a human in the loop there, or is it just, hey, the auditor told me how to fix this, I'm going to just fix it now?
Yeah, what Wes says. I was suggesting that this would only apply if you requested a fix.
Sure. So
if you requested automatic fixing.
Yeah. But if you do request, I mean, I guess the question I'm saying is if you did NPM audit fix, is it a bigger change to say I want to fix this with an override, or should fix kind of treat an override as something more aggressive or a different UX? I don't know. That's a question we're thinking about. I would probably want it switched on all the time because you trust your registry. That's why you're doing NPM audit fix.
Well, and given that an override is supposed to be overriding a specific set of vulnerable versions, if the CLI first says, is there let me first try to upgrade it without the overrides and then see if the overrides still apply, right? That means that that ensures that if a newer version that's fixed comes out, that the override just kind of fades away. And then by default, people get exactly what they want, which is trusting their registry and getting a fixed version as much as possible.
So we should document that.
Right. So, because even if we automatically, you're right, that's a good point. So even if we automatically apply the override, we're first going to try to find a version that doesn't need the override.
Yeah.
Right.
And it'll only apply to packages that are within that vulnerable range anyway.
Yeah.
Cool. I dig it.
Apologies, I'm just taking notes here, trying to capture things. So we should talk. We'll look at connected. In terms of next steps here. Okay.
Do we want to go ahead and ratify this now, sort of pending overrides, or wait until we get?
Is there anything that we have to do on our side, or is it, as long as we're blessing this and that we're going to?
Well, we're blessing overrides anyway, so we just decided we're doing that.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, I'm okay. Go ahead.
The one thing I would like to be able to know in advance is what the is what the API changes to the audit endpoint will look like. Like, and they could be the examples here, although I think I'd want to actually write it out as like, this is what the change is. Because like I'll be getting ahead of that on my side to do things with that change if I know what it's going to be.
I will. I'll take an action item to just kind of read through this and spend an hour meditating on what kind of cases we definitely want to be able to cover in this. But I think, I mean, I think at first glance, what you have here looks pretty much what I would do. So I don't think there's any hazard in committing to an API change at this point. No idea exactly when it's going to get in.
Yeah.
But other registries can start using it as soon as the client does.
Yep.
Wes, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering, so the concern I raised in the last meeting was about when these are no longer necessary. And when I'm thinking about the API making recommendation, is there any reason the API can't also then make a recommendation to remove them when they're no longer necessary?
So sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I would think this is kind of a more general thing of like, what do you do when your package JSON has a bunch of overrides that don't apply to your tree? Because this doesn't stop the CLI from updating the package. Like, this is just saying, if you resolve to 3.0.0, go use this other thing instead. But if the CLI resolves to 3.0.1, it doesn't use the override.
Right.
So true. I think that's exactly the same kind of case here where, and that's one where the CLI could detect it. But I think there's the other case where the CLI can't detect it because what it really is that the upstream patched, right? And you can remove the override.
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, right. But if you then later, like you kind of want to keep that override, even when it no longer applies to your tree. Because if you're depending on something else, or you pull in something else now at a later date that depends on that vulnerable version, you sort of want your override to still be there protecting you. So
it being a never-ending list that just gets a append-only list is like not going to be great, especially since it's in the package JSON. I think there's a broader category though, as Rebecca mentioned, which is not specific to this RFC. Right. And so I think we should just be considering like maybe adding to NPM Doctor, although NPM Doctor is not something people run very often. So like, and it's also kind of slow and checks a ton of other things. Yeah. I mean, something else that would effectively undo it when it was correct, whether that's coming from the API that gave you the recommendation in the first place or some other command that knows how to rectify the situation. I think we should put a little bit of thought to it.
Well, I think also another thing that we had discussed in the overrides conversation was, what is the NPM CLI user experience for managing your overrides? And that's kind of a whole other big convoluted ball of wax. It's not a terrible JSON structure to write by hand and to read. It's pretty straightforward, but you may want to be able to have an NPM command that will create an override. And in whatever like NPM override command, we may have a thing that's like find the ones that are like NPM override prune to remove anything that doesn't apply.
I was just going to say prune. Yeah. Interesting. So in terms of this specific RFC, I took the action item down. Isaac, you're going to take another pass at this just to look at review this, and then it sounds like so in terms of us implementing this in the public registry, is this, again, we said last week, this may not be something that we want to start supporting there, but private registries can essentially go ahead and start to implement this once we start to support it. I just want to make sure there is an action item on us now to go poke our registry peers.
Well, I think once we are supporting it on the CLI, it's really a question of like, do we want to float those patches, right? Or
I don't think
like, or do we want to just kind of have like the support overhead of on our security team, which is a totally different and like non-technical.
I think that's a whole product.
question.
Yeah, that's a whole product decision, right? So and I think that was kind of like what we alluded to, is like the space here and the improvement here and change here, like really is a feature for private registries to take on. It sounds like there's interest, which is why we're considering this. Gar, I see your hands up, and then Rebecca, I think you also wanted to.
Yeah, I just wanted to, there is no action item for us other than to reiterate with the backend, we should not be doing this, and it should not be on our roadmap. This is not something the public registry should get into the game of.
Yeah, it's rather opinionated.
So something else that kind of that we kind of mentioned, we touched on briefly in the last meeting, and that kind of came up when I was talking about this with my team, which was so this gets into the like, okay, if the registry knows that you should be using this other package instead, what, like we do have this weird scenario where it's like, well, if Symver compatible, if you're installing a fresh module, we'll pick the most recent version that matches your Symver. So you'll never have anything that npm audit fix can do on a fresh install. Except now with the overrides, you would, if we introduce this overrides thing. So what do we do about that? Is kind of the question raised by that.
Sorry, so on a fresh install.
So if I go to a directory and install a module, everything there is going to be the most recent version that npm can install that's compatible with it. So therefore, npm audit fix will never tell me that we'll never be able to automatically apply any fixes because everything's up to date.
But doesn't the registry determine what's installed? The registry that's providing overrides?
So it determines, well, here's the thing though, is it determines what versions are installed, but it can't tell you go install this other completely different package instead, this hotfix. And that's where we're kind of going with that, is it would be really nice to have a way of having this information at install time so that we never install the bad version.
So there is actually, I mean, we did this for npm enterprise and it never made it into the public registry. And it's also a thing that maybe shouldn't be in the public registry, but you can put those versions into a sort of restricted versions holding pen within the document.
Yeah, we could make them uninstallable, but in this case, we've got a patch that we want to install instead with the overrides, with this overrides RFC, overrides audit RFC. So it would be really nice if we had a way of saying, when you first install the version from the override, rather than the version that we know is wrong and you're going to install it and then npm audit is going to immediately say, you should run npm audit fix to fix this.
Right. Well, and there's also the case where a vulnerability is introduced and npm audit fix will downgrade you below the latest and greatest.
Yeah, I guess that's the same thing.
It's similar. Yeah. And I think the bigger, so the broader question there is, we currently have this process where you build out this whole ideal tree and then we reify the whole thing. And then we check to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities. And we say, oops, there's a vulnerability. You should probably fix that. Yeah. Like, is there some way to shorten that window and, get the information about the ideal tree and then make those changes to the ideal tree ahead of time, before we reify it to disk.
I mean, it seems like when fetching package metadata, one could using the APIs today, one could go check to see if there are any vulnerabilities on. I guess it's on a per version basis though, so that does make it trickier.
Wes, I see your hands up, and then I just want to be mindful of time as we have about 15 minutes left. Go ahead.
Then I'll be very quick. This is a great line of thinking. I think there's a lot of power in the ability to modify the tree before you reify. I've said that before. If there is a way that we can come up with a plan that will actually let people make arbitrary changes to the tree based on whatever suggestion logic they want to implement, that would be excellent and would save me a bunch of time, because I've got something built kind of like that that's not finished, and I would just abandon the project if y'all were willing to do something like that. It just needs to be more than apply overrides. Like, you need to be able to run logic, make API queries, like just you need to be able to run arbitrary execution against it in order to solve, I think, all the problems that companies have implemented solutions for in this space. Yeah, like a hook would be great if it like loaded up a file, ran the function it exported, and passed it the Arborist instance. That would like solve all of my problems.
Thank you so much.
So it sounds like some more RFCs, some more additions to this.
Sounds like more cool proposals.
Yeah.
Yes.
I should write this one up. I'm just so delinquent. I know I'm so bad at writing them up. I just say them and hope somebody else will do the work of doing the write up. But this one I should probably do myself.
Eventually, that does usually work.
Yes.
That's the problem. I've been rewarded for that behavior so far.
Exactly.
Good
Okay.
ideas bubble to the top. Yeah.
What's next here? We got 15 more minutes.
Yeah. So just action item here. Again, it seems like we're okay with like landing this alongside the overrides RFC. Moving on, I believe with this got kept on the agenda, although I feel like Jordan made some really good comments, feedback, and essentially reasons why we should not move forward with Miles's initial proposal here and sort of discussion around adding type to npm init. I think we can probably just remove the agenda label here and probably try to capture, I think, a lot of that feedback that was had last week, unless folks have any strong opinions as to wanting this essentially.
I would like to not add anything to the default npm init. It is what it is, and it's pretty easy to extend with your own create modules. That's a pattern that a lot of people are using. Like, you can have a npm init ESM that just calls the create ESM package, and it's exactly that.
And that implying type module is exactly why I very much don't want that to be in the default, because that's not what that means. So I'm just on board with what Isaac's saying.
Yep. Or make your own create module. It's super easy.
Yeah.
Or just use npm init Isaacs if you want to write code like I do and give me credit for it.
This
Go ahead.
This brings up a point that I think I was talking with someone from LinkedIn about. Is there any programmatic way to do like the init? Like, is there a programmatic way I can use the default, like whatever npm init runs? Like, can I modify the results of npm init without having to rewrite all that logic myself?
Depending on what you mean by that question, yes.
Okay.
But the details vary wildly. The simplest answer is it's JSON. You parse it and change it and write it back. It's fine. The more involved question is like, if what you're saying is like, if I run npm init foo, can you modify how the foo package works? Like, yeah, use a different package or just run npx foo yourself.
I guess more specifically, like, I would love to be able to hook into whatever, like either the interactive logic or just the -y logic, and well, not -y doesn't make sense. But like be able to hook like an additional question into npm init, like the interactive.
Right.
And so like then I don't have to rewrite all that, and it's like close enough to what npm already provides.
There is a very, very, very strange API surface that you can use. I'm pretty sure almost nobody uses it. We haven't ripped it out because we haven't gotten around to it yet. But you can specify an init module which uses this thing I wrote in 2010 called Promzard. And yeah, you can if you look at the default init module that's being used, you can see the syntax for creating those scripts. It's very bizarre, and it predates almost everything in Node today. So
I guess maybe this is perhaps an RFC, but like being able to hook, like pass it, require whatever npm init does, and then pass in an additional question would be like an amazing DX enhancement for npm init, you know, create whatever. Because like then theoretically npm init create ESM, despite it already being published, would be like requiring a thing, putting in like 3 lines of code, and then you have type module, which I have wanted in many cases, but also like larger companies want it for their internal usage of their own modules to, you know, create stuff or like automatically default to things without having to do a bunch of rewriting the whole thing every time.
Yeah, so I just linked a couple things in chat, and Wes also noted like this is a lot of what you're speaking to, Toon, is what we're trying to do in the package maintenance working group. We kicked off the create-pkg project, which should have both programmatic APIs that you can consume and utilize, as well as give you the ability to sort of scaffold and template based on what your patterns are for your ecosystem, for your community, for your organization. And that's the whole idea behind it. And like potentially the hope in the future might be that we would actually consume it for init, if it makes sense, if it was easy. But yeah, we're trying to like essentially push that conversation over there and get folks working on that. So
it is unfortunate that the programmatic usage is a to-do right now.
I think Chris picked
no,
it. Yeah.
It's not technically. That's not, the to-do list is a little bit there.
Oh, okay.
Every single field has some little bit of logic to be able to use it in either the CLI, the interactive prompts, or the programmatic usage. And I think the way he wrote up the to-do list.
I mean, literally the example is that like await create package, and there's a comment that's to do. That was more of what I was getting at.
Okay, maybe
in the README.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, yeah. There's still a lot of work to do. So I'm not saying it's like ready, go for it, but like it at least does support programmatic overrides of different fields and you know how you scaffold the stuff. So
cool.
So with about 10 minutes left, I'm going to try to plow through a bunch of these. In terms of the npm workspaces auto switching context based on the current working directory, I forget where we landed with this conversation, but it feels a little bit bigger than than maybe the 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, probably. Probably if you want to skip then.
Yeah, let's bump this to the top of the list for next time.
Great.
I'd like to dig into this as well a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay, great. So feel free to async to give comments, and it looks like Wes was commenting on this even today, so that's great. So moving forward and skipping that, then RC 339, improving command suggestions. Nilf, I know hasn't been able to jump on these calls the last little while. This is pretty straightforward though. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think we've essentially done this. This work is essentially improving the output. I know Gar has already done a bunch of this work and cleaning up the defaults. What you'll notice in more recent versions of npm, if you're keeping up to date, is that that output is now a lot more cleaned up, and our suggested or did you mean output is a lot, hopefully a lot more helpful and actionable. So I don't know if we I don't know if we just land this as is, or does it need to be modified to match reality. Gar, you probably know if this looks like what we've implemented.
I think it looks enough to accept that as an RFC. I don't think the RFC needs to match every letter on every line.
So this can probably get routed.
Because we've been iterating on it a little just to make things a little more clear, or to add comments about, npm exec runs an external thing versus runs an internal thing, kind of a thing. Just moving things in a direction to reduce the ambiguity between exec and run and nothing.
Right. So I think this is also in the category of like somebody just needs to read through it and make sure that we're not lying about anything, and then let's go ahead and land it.
Yeah, I'm going to take
it's what
the
we're
action.
doing. We're ratifying it. So
yeah, I'll take the action item to move that forward. Maybe I'll do it in the same pairing session that I have with Roy later this week. With the second, did anybody else have any comments on that? It's pretty straightforward. The second RFC that Nilfed created is the where config. So nicely named that Jordan loves it. Essentially improving the experience of npm config to give you more control over where essentially you are meaning to get and set config values. And so the hope here is that we can introduce some config, it doesn't have to be the name where, that allows you to specify the location, including the ability for us to define like at the project level. And the hope is in a future major release, we could change that default so that the expectation of the user is that npm config set would actually interface with your local npm RC file in your project, which I think is a bit confusing for some folks, at least from the feedback I've gotten. And having that ability to set that at the project level, I think is pretty nice. So
there are some unresolved questions in bike shedding that should be resolved and bike shedded before we land this. Sure. And I think first of all, like having npm config set take a -- global to write to your global config, or otherwise write to your local config, like it's not great. It leaves basically no way to specify project. It's classic case of like a Boolean where really what we wanted was a string or an enum. And the need to be able to do that for exec also is pressing, and has a lot of, is also similar. The only thing that gets my eyebrows a little wrinkly is where equals user kind of doesn't mean anything for exec, but it does mean something for config.
Right.
And so I wonder if it, do we just throw if where is set to user when you're running exec? Like that could be fine. But I would definitely want to be clear in the RFC itself, if we're treating it as sort of like a spec, like what is the default and what do we do if it's set to something that doesn't make sense.
Sure. Okay. So we'll leave it open for now then. There's like some unresolved questions there. Also the naming, I know Jordan's beat on this. If you have a better name,
vague name, unfortunately.
Where should probably not be used. Like it's just too, it's too much of an umbrella term. So location or something like that. Okay. Moving on then with a few minutes left. I want to keep this on our radar. The npm audit licenses RFC. Tierney 182. Is there any update on this?
I don't think there's any update. No. Yeah, my understanding is I'm waiting on just advice on where to go from here. I might have missed something, but I don't think I have. Yeah, just waiting on like, what y'all would want me to do. And I'm happy to take that async. That's
You
basically
proof
it.
of concept it almost.
I mean, I built my own thing. It was on Arborist. It wasn't really proof of concept, like it works or worked. It was also using Arborist before the npm 7 rewrite, so Arborist changed a lot and it broke, and I just haven't gotten around to fixing it. So it kind of works. But yeah, it doesn't work with like the new Arborist. I think it does still technically work with the old Arborist, like the pre-new, like in between Arborist.
Yeah, the beta version of
Yeah,
it.
the beta. Yeah. So I built my own thing. It doesn't implement this API at all. So like I basically built a thing that I wanted. I think licensee is probably a better example of something that people use, including npm, that is like doing the policies thing rather than just reporting. But yeah, I'd love to see this move forward in some way, and I'm happy to do the work. I just want the direction of y'all to know which direction will be accepted, basically.
Okay.
I mean, we've wanted to pull in licensee functionality for a pretty long time. I think having a way to, have a licenses policy file and then get the info about the licenses in use within the tree. Like we have all the parts there. We should just, I don't know if it's npm audit that should be doing it, or because that's currently at least really just for security, or if it should be a new top level command.
That's fair.
I
think the big, sorry, go ahead.
I think the way forward there is just like, let's sketch out what the UX looks like, and then anything we want to do is, like I said, we have all the pieces, so putting them together shouldn't be too hard.
I think initially the feedback. Oh, we're at time. I'll stop. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. We have a couple that we weren't able to get to that hopefully we can next week, and we'll push things through between now and then. Feel free to keep giving feedback and opening up RFCs. Guard, did you have one comment you wanted to make before we go?
Just that npm ls is the show information about our package tree command, right? If we want to show what the licenses are, that should be a thing ls can do, right?
There's been some discussion in the past about ls outdated, outdated, and some other commands that all are essentially filters of the same information, and that really it would be great if the UX UI of those outputs were essentially just filtered versions of that same kind of information. And
I would also say that the proposal isn't just show me licenses. It's also let me prevent licenses from being like packages with viral licenses from being installed and stuff like that. So it's like it's validate and filter and basically let me act on the licenses that are in my dependency tree.
Yeah,
and
so another
go ahead.
So part of where that might get really interesting is actually hooking into the build ideal tree and reify process. So if you tried to install something, we could say like, hey, there's a bad license in here. You shouldn't be using it, and either crash the install or print a warning or do whatever.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, whether we use licensee or not, I hope that we at least include all the features licensee has, because the exact implementation I did at Airbnb with it was because the legal team says, these are the licenses we specifically want. These are the licenses we very much don't want. And then there were a bunch of old packages in our tree that didn't have SPIDX identifiers in the package JSON. Yep. But I did the manual research to figure out exactly which was which.
Yep.
And then eventually was able to put that in a shared public corrections package so that that work didn't have to be repeated by other people. And so all of those things are very critical, I think, regardless of what implementation we go.
So apologize, we're a few minutes over, and I know we got started late. Thank you everyone for jumping on again. And hopefully we'll see you next week at the same time, same place. And keep giving us feedback in the RFCs themselves. And thank you.
Yeah.